guys, this is Andrew with High Level Reviews, and today I'd like to take a look at Brave Fencer Musashi. The game was released in October of 1998 on the PS1 and was unfortunately tucked between some major Squaresoft releases. It had to contend with Final Fantasy VII and Xenogears before it, and Final Fantasy VIII after it. In fact, most gamers tend only to recall this game for its inclusion of a Final Fantasy VIII demo. Many reviews of the time dismissively compared it to Zelda, and this unfortunately mischaracterized and diminished what Brave Fencer Musashi has to offer. It is a distinct title that can stand on its own charm and personality without need for comparison. The game opens up by focusing on the all-you-can-eat kingdom being at war with the Thirst Quencher Empire. And if you're already rolling your eyes at the puns, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Most characters and locations involve wordplay or blatant puns, some more lame than others, but all pretty funny at times. Princess Filet summons Musashi to save the kingdom. However, she is kidnapped, and many of the castle servants are placed in Bencho fields, which Musashi must attack with Lumina to rescue. Musashi isn't terribly enthused that he has to help everybody out, but he ends up agreeing so that he can return home. Unfortunately, he is far more diminutive than the people thought he might be, and probably quite a bit more sarcastic as well. It's a pretty straightforward and simple plot with relatively little character development or evolution. Musashi is really the only one that develops over the course of the game. He goes from a bratty and sardonic little kid to a slightly less sarcastic and slightly less bratty little kid. However, he is far more thankful and far more appreciative of the citizens he's helping. Most of the characters are simply there to serve a purpose, and they rarely feel alive or multi-layered. It definitely should have dedicated a few more sections or parts of the games to concentrating on just character development and connections. While they are usually great characters individually, and that's primarily due to voice acting, they don't really tend to change and you don't really know much about them. Instead of developing intricate backstories, the various characters are instead imbued with charm by the voice acting, which is fantastic in most of the game. A few characters miss the mark by sounding forced and unnatural, but most, and Musashi in particular, are fantastic. And it's really no surprise. His voice actor, Mona Marshall, is well known and voices Sheila Broflovsky and Wendy in South Park and Kite in the Dot Hack series. The writing is also typically excellent. The game features tons of food puns. If that's your sort of thing, you'll enjoy it in this. Innocent interactions, and caustic wit, primarily employed by Musashi, and should have audiences of just about all ages smiling. Musashi is constantly deriding and ridiculing people under his breath, and the occasional inner monologues are a blast to read. There's a segment early in the game where John, a character you meet that is in the stockade for stealing, presumably, tries to convince you that he is a treasure hunter, and attempts to portray this elaborately as a very sought-after profession, and one that bestows great gifts and great admiration from everybody. Yet Musashi refuses to acknowledge this and just calls him a thief. These wonderful exchanges happen throughout the game with Musashi at the center, and though I stated earlier that there isn't a lot of character development and that there isn't a lot of backstory, you really don't need a lot of that with Musashi as the main character. He provides so much of the charm and so much of the game's character and identity that you don't need to know a lot else about other characters. A great compliment to the voice acting is the soundtrack, which is excellent and includes subtle variations and additions. For instance, when you save a musician from the Bencho field, that musician's respective instrument is then included in the main town's theme. These nuances make it a very addictive soundtrack. One of the key aspects of the fighting system in Musashi is absorbing different powers using his sword, Fusion. This simple mechanic ends up layering the experience and providing various ways to fight enemies and solve puzzles. Though typically to solve environmental problems you have to absorb a certain ability, such as acquiring the hop ability to maneuver through thorny overgrowths that block progress. Using these abilities uses BP, and this must be monitored because if it runs out, Musashi enters a weakened state and moves slowly and attacks weakly. There are tons of foods that recover BP though, and many monsters that drop BP in small amounts. I personally enjoyed this feature as it gave variety in combat and added strategic depth to the game's fighting system. It's also a great way of gating the stronger abilities in the game, such as Javelin. This ability can be hurled from long range and does a lot of damage. Probably would have made the game a lot less challenging if you'd been able to simply spam this ability. Musashi also gets tired while fighting and just walking around, and to solve this issue you must sleep, either at an inn, in Musashi's house, or on the field, though unfortunately this won't drop the sleep gauge below 20%, you'll need to find an actual bed to do that. Similar to the BP issue, there are items that address fatigue, and as money isn't an issue because each monster has a chance to drop an amount and the respawn rate of monsters is pretty high, you won't need to sleep while exploring too often. Lumina, Musashi's legendary sword, also provides different actions for you. You can learn combos that combine Fusion and Lumina, do huge charged up counterattacks with Lumina, and unlock trapped characters from Bencho fields by attacking it with Lumina. You also control the different crests you unlock with Lumina: fire, water, wind, earth, and sky. And these are often used to interact with different objects on the map that are needed to solve puzzles, such as using the Earth Scroll to knock down a boulder to create a path for you. Musashi's stats progress by simply using both swords and fighting enemies. You're not going to need to grind, as there is a cap per chapter, and it reaches that cap through natural exploration and questing. Though if you wanted to grind, it wouldn't really be that difficult because, as I've already mentioned, the respawn rate is sky high. This is sort of a double-edged sword, because while this acts as an expedient for gaining money, which is fantastic, it also unfortunately can box you in on more narrow maps because of how fast they spawn on either side of you. The moment you leave the screen, they immediately respawn. So needless to say, when you're going back and forth on certain maps, it can become more of an irritant than a positive. They just should have worked to find a more reasonable respawn rate. The platforming was a bit of a mixed bag at times. Most sections were challenging for all the right reasons and superbly designed, but there were a few that just got a bit infuriating due to peculiar layouts of obscured paths, and this is due primarily to the camera not being rotatable outside of town. Thankfully, these instances weren't common and didn't put a blight on the platforming for me. There isn't a lot of hand-holding in regards to solving puzzles, but admittedly, most of them are transparent enough that you won't need to spend more than a few moments considering your options. There is also a 24-hour cycle that completes about every 15 minutes. Each store in most citizens' houses open up at specific times. Though it could at times be annoying to have to sleep to a specific time or event, it was cool to see the environments change and to have so many events associated with the different times. It gave the game and the town a more lively touch, a feel as though it were a real town and a real world. There were many players and some reviewers that had ambivalent views towards the controls, and admittedly there are times that it could get a little frustrating, but I didn't have issues with them most of the time. The layout is wonderful and doesn't force you to contort your hands to perform tasks. I've read myriad complaints about the responsiveness of the jump command, but I simply didn't feel it was noticeable enough to affect the platforming, or that I could blame my frequently failed jumps on it. This was often an issue with my own timing, rather than the control scheme or responsiveness of the inputs. Graphically, Brave Fencer Musashi features polygonal characters and backgrounds in a 3D environment. The design of the characters is similar to Final Fantasy VII in that certain body parts are overblown or exaggerated. Brave Fencer Musashi manages to cram more detail into each character, usually noticeable in the face or clothing. Musashi's character is by far, and understandably, the most detailed. The backgrounds are diverse and all pretty vibrant. Nothing spectacular for that generation, but certainly impressive. The bosses are also huge and usually have plenty of intricacies. While Brave Fencer Musashi certainly has some rough areas and is a bit unrefined as an overall experience, I loved the game. It exudes charm and humor by utilizing copious amounts of puns and dismissive put-downs by Musashi. It's just a fun game. It's not complex or particularly challenging in most areas of the game, it's just simply a blast to play. The game was unfortunately obfuscated by more prominent titles and characters and by consistent mischaracterizations and unfair comparisons. It's a game worth experiencing. Don't let its aim at a younger audience fool you. It's a game every age can enjoy. Thanks for watching, guys, and if you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment on the video. This has been Andrew with High Level Reviews, and I appreciate you guys stopping by.